The cargo plane leaves us, and the last of the warm air with a blunt shove, and the camp takes over from there. Floodlights burn through the white haze. The drilling tower sits on its square of grooved aluminum, the melt rig humming through the night shift. I step down from the tracked carrier and feel the surface crackle under my boots. The station chief points past the fuel bladders at the blue-lit tent where the sterilization team waits. The wind keeps its steady push across the ice. I keep my head down and carry my pack to the tent flap. Inside, the smell turns to solvent and plastic, and the noise of the storm drops away. I set the recorder on the bench and start the log. I say the date, the coordinates, and the words I did not expect to say in my career. 2 miles down, the sonar shows architecture. Juneau Park pulls back the curtain with a gloved hand and nods once. She carries a tablet sealed in a clear bag. She does not speak until the sterilization tech finishes the wipe on my hood and steps aside. "We got the last pass while you were in the air," she says. "Not a lens artifact, not a bubble. It reflects on straight lines." Her voice stays even, but her hand grips the tablet. She brings up the last scan, a black void where the borehole meets a lens of water, and beyond it faint ribs and corridors through the ice. We are not supposed to put a person into a subglacial cavern. We built a manual for that kind of risk. Then we locked it in a binder and set it in a crate we never open. Juneau closes the image and taps the call button for surface ops. "We go now," she says, before the melt refreezes. Hamid meets us at the rig with his checklist and his patience. He runs cables through his hands while he talks. Capsule heat at 100%. Oxygen topped. Winch spooled. Redundant comms on low power. He looks at Juneau, then at me. "We follow contamination protocol. No samples without double seal. You break a seal to touch something. You lose the right to come home on the first lift." He says it to both of us, but the last part lands on me. I nod and start into the suit. The lower half seals at my waist with a ring that clicks under my fingers. The visor floats down on servos and locks. The radio checks in my ear, then fades as Hamid dials it down to the bare minimum. The capsule door opens on its side hinge. The interior is as clean as a surgical tray. I step inside and clip the safety lines, then help Juneau with her lines. The door shuts, and the world turns to metal and a narrow view of white sky through the top porthole. Hamid's voice comes through as a low thread. Lowering, the capsule tilts and slips into the round mouth of the borehole. Frost runs past in sheets. The wall glow of our heaters throws the ice into honeyed blues and grays. The cable sings above us with quiet tension that slides up and down with each foot of descent. I call out depth every 100 feet. Juneau answers with temperature, then salinity when the sensors show the first film of brine. The capsule heater keeps the skin hot enough to steam, and the vapor trails away into darkness. The light from our crown lamps reaches 10 feet and nothing more. We fall through a tunnel we made with hot metal and stubborn planning, and yet it feels older than both of us. Juneau says, 1 mile, and marks the note with a stylus that squeaks against the tablet cover. At 1.2 miles under this ice sheet is just a number in a report. Down here it measures as weight in the cable and the rare creak in the capsule frame. The sonar nicks on, and the display shows a pale halo. It expands and fades. I log the reading, then turn off the ping. The last thing I want is to knock on a door we do not understand. The heater gauge settles. The capsule slows. Hamid's voice returns. "Approach to the pocket in 40 feet. His words grow careful. Pressure equalization looks good. Water temperature at 32.5. No currents. A click and a hiss, and the floor floats up under my boots. The capsule touches water. Buoyancy takes part of the weight, and the winch pays out slower. We enter the cavern like a bead sinking into a glass of clear syrup. The lamps work harder in open space. Light sweeps out and touches a wall that does not act like ice. The surface takes light and carries it. Lines move across it in clean tracks that curve and then meet at sharp angles. Juno raises her head to the porthole and lets out a breath that fogs the glass in a quick patch. "It is not fracture," she says. "It is pattern." The capsule nose taps a shelf. The shelf is smooth and holds against the melt. I unclip, check the wrist seals again, and push the outer door lever. Cold air moves past my faceplate in a clean tide. I step out and feel my weight press through the boot soles into something that is not rock and not ice. It has the firmness of ice, but the surface grips without roughness. I test my balance and take a step. The shelf extends 3 capsule lengths and ends in a drop to dark water. Beyond the water, the wall curves away and up into the weight-bearing dome of the cavern. The ribs in the wall cross and stop at right angles. It is the kind of geometry we draw, and the ice does not. Juno drops to one knee near the shelf edge and aims the camera. The red laser spots sweep and settle in a grid. The return map builds on her tablet in neat strokes. Hamid's voice murmurs in my ear with his own posture I know well. One hand on the winch, one on the kill switch, one eye on the scope, one ear on us. I anchor the tether to a ring on the capsule and pay out 3 arm lengths. I lay a nylon line from the capsule door to the shelf edge. The line glows from a strip woven along its length for this job, a breadcrumb you can see through fog and panic. I keep the radio on low and use hand signs with Juno. She points left. The wall there holds an opening just wide enough for a person in a suit to pass. The opening is not a natural melt channel. It keeps the same width from floor to roof. I test it with the end of my ice probe. The tip knocks and comes back clean. I slide the line through my belt loop and enter. The passage swallows the lamp glow and feeds it forward. It bends in a gentle arc and then flares into a chamber with a floor that dips toward a round pool. The pool holds water that does not ripple. Dark rods rise from the pool and stop at different heights, as if a rack waited for parts. The rods are not ice either. They shine without reflection, and where a drop of melt lands on one, it hangs and then vanishes into the surface. Juno speaks low. "Conductive." She glances toward the wall. "Acoustic paneling here in the ice." She places the butt of her probe against a clear patch and taps once. The chamber answers with a tone so pure it turns my mouth dry. It starts at a low pitch and climbs by clean steps. It repeats the pattern of her single tap with a scale of its own. Juno looks at me through her visor. The chamber waits. I lift the probe and tap twice with a small space between touches. The chamber repeats me, then extends the pattern with 2 more notes. I raise a hand to my radio switch and turn it lower. I do not know what else in my gear makes a sound worth mapping. Juno nods and mirrors me. The chamber holds the last tone a second longer and lets it fade. The rods around the pool respond with a faint pulse that moves from one to the next. The pulses cross at a point above the still water. The air cools around that point with a prickly clarity that shows on my visor as a white fog in the corners. Juno's voice stays steady. It is live. It is not asleep. She holds out the small sampler on a telescoping arm. No touch, just a near pass. She moves it along the nearest rod. The sampler display shifts through ranges until a set of numbers steady in the green. She retracts the arm, locks the head, and tucks the tube into a sterile sleeve. It is the smallest theft in human history, and still a theft. A line of brighter points scratches itself onto the wall opposite us, dot by dot, as if a pen writes from left to right. The dots resolve into a trace of our passage. The capsule, the shelf, the tunnel, this chamber. 2 people as solid ovals. Then the wall erases the trace in a single wash and leaves only the dome of the cavern and the long hole of the bore. The hole brightens and dims in a slow beat. I do not say the word signal. I do not say the word heart. I just lift my gloved hand in the air between me and the wall and close the fingers once as if to pinch a light. The bright on the bore fades. The room replies with a quiet click behind the wall. The rods tilt a fraction and return to stillness. Hamid calls. Cable tension just changed. 3% drop. Water around you is warming a fraction. He fights to sound bored. Stay ahead of it. Do not let it close behind you. I look at the passage back to the shelf. In a normal melt hole, the roof drips in coarse beads. Here the roof stays dry and smooth. Juno points at another opening beyond the pool. It runs deeper and narrower, then flares. We should not push past the point of return, but no one funded this to stop at the lobby. I place a small beacon on the floor pad that the rods share just in case the line fails. The beacon chirps at 1-second intervals and writes a time code to my recorder. We move. The next chamber holds a sheet of ice that looks as clear as air. Behind it sit forms that make the skin between my fingers tighten where the glove presses. Their shapes repeat and scale up. Knots, lattices, wheels with too many spokes to build by hand. Nothing here says creature. Nothing here says statue. It looks like the inside of a machine hung in a window more than a room. Juno runs the laser across the sheet. The lines bend into the ice and return with no stray scatter. Waveguide, she says. Not for light, for sound. She turns her head toward the ceiling, as if she can hear beyond the range of our radios. I can feel the pressure of a slow tone inside the helmet foam. My jaw wants to shift. I lean on discipline and do not clench. The tone passes through us and does not act on us. The sheet answers with shivers I can see. We try silence. We give it 20 seconds. The tone lowers. We move our feet, and that is enough noise for an answer. The wall lights run under the clear sheet in a net of pale lines that flow toward the bore direction. I raise my pen and write on Juno's sleeve. We shift to hand signs and scribbles. Move slow, reduce vibration. Keep weight to the mats of the line. We cross the chamber on strips of foam hauled down in the capsule for a purpose that did not exist until now. The ice under the foam stays dark and unstressed. The chamber approves, or at least stops responding. The city hears and prefers our quiet step. The floor at the far side lifts slowly and becomes a ramp. It does not lift by a mechanism I can see. It inflates itself by degrees and holds. The grade eases to a walkable slope. Juno stares once, then raises a hand to show calm and points to the ramp. We both know this is the line we risk for science, and the line that a reasonable person would not cross. But a door that opens at your pace after it watched how hard your boots press and how your tools talk is a door that listens. I put one foot on the ramp. The surface stays firm, with the same grip that keeps a boot steady without coarse grit. We go up. At the top, the room opens into a circle with a well at its center. The well holds water black as a power cut. Above it hangs a mesh, thin as hair and stretched across the opening. Drops from the roof land on it and vanish. The mesh ripples without a wave. I can find no anchor for it at the rim. It floats in place, sustained by the rods that run under the floor and up the far wall. Juno sets the tripod for the microprobe and points me to the tether. I lock my harness to a ring embedded where floor meets wall. She lowers the microprobe toward the mesh until the tip sits a hand's width above it. The mesh curls up to meet the probe before she completes the move. She halts. The probe stays where it is. The mesh holds below it without touch. Hamid breathes into the channel. Surface seismic just showed a snap 2 kilometers from your point. No amplitude here yet. Be ready. He does not tell us to leave. He knows what we stand over. Juno winds the probe up a centimeter. The mesh follows. She writes on my forearm. It tracks pressure gradient. She edges the probe left. The mesh tilts left. She holds the probe still. The mesh stills. I lift my hand and shape it like a roof with my palm down. Juno nods and mouths, "Shelter system." The rods around the room answer with a soft tremor that moves around the circle and stops at our side. The air takes on a smell like wet stone newly broken. Fresh water moves under the floor in capillaries I cannot see, but can infer from the trace on the sensor panel. Then the cavern ceiling beyond the entrance chamber answers the distant snap with its own adjustment. The suit warns me with a red line across the top of my visor. Pressure drop, small but real. The line goes back to white. The well mesh deepens for a second, and then returns to flat. It acted before the wave reached us. Juno glances at her watch as if to pin the timing down to whole seconds. She finds the match faster than I do. "It runs ahead of the signal," she says. Her mouth makes the words behind the shield, and the radio passes them on. Predictive modulation. It listens to the ice and corrects the cavern before the stress arrives. The mesh rises toward the probe again. This time it keeps going until it hovers a finger's width from the tip and holds. The rods surrounding the room brighten. The pattern in their faces holds at the exact spacing of the glare stripes on the capsule lamps. It is counting what we brought, and speaking in the only form we both share. Juno reaches to the probe controls and writes 5 numbers on the screen with the stylus. The period of our last sonar test. The pause between heater cycles. The drift of the winch motor. The interval between Hamid's check-ins. The current spacing of my own recorded notes. She taps the enter key and drops the probe by a millimeter. The mesh lowers to match and holds. The rods flash in a sequence that calls back the 5 numbers as 5 beats and changes the last one to a new number. I see it far too late. The new number is the period of my breathing. I slow and steady it to a mark I can keep without strain. The rods stop flashing when I hold that mark for 10 beats. Our radios crackle with a scrape I have heard from an old speaker in a cold hut. A voice forms out of noise and repeats one word in Juno's tone from earlier. "Now." That is all it says. It files the sound with care and gives it back without breath behind it. Juno and I both freeze into stillness that would make a rescue tech proud. Hamid says, very low, "Copy." He tightens the line through the winch by a fraction, so the capsule will not drift from the shelf into the pool. Juno straightens her back and answers with a single syllable, "Wait." The radio gives it back to us from the wall at the same pitch, the same length. It is not a sentence. It is a mirror. We retreat down the ramp the same way we climbed it. The room lets the slope ease back to flat as we step off. The beacon at the first chamber still chirps. I count the chirps and mark them to keep my mind in order and not in speculation. The rods settle. The pool holds its black and its still top. We reach the entrance passage. The floor there has skinned over with a thin crust. It breaks under my boot with a clean snap. The ice in the tunnel does not look the same as when we came in. It seems so smooth it could be poured. I put my weight on the next step and feel the floor yield by a hair, then firm. I lift my foot, and the footprint closes. I keep moving before I can name the wrong word for that behavior. The city does not want a hole left unpatched. At the shelf, the capsule has shifted. The front edge has sunk an inch, and a lip has grown around its base that holds it like a ring. The winch cable winks with tiny crystals that were not there 10 minutes ago. Hamid swears in a language he reserves for metal. "I need you in and the heaters at full," he says. Juno takes the stern handhold and braces while I bring the front jack up to lift the nose. The jack presses into the floor. The floor flows around the foot and then sets as hard as before. The capsule rises enough to free the ring. I lock the jack and we climb inside. Juno seals her belt. I seal mine. I throw the heater switch to maximum. The cable twitch eases as the crystals fall in a bright spray. The capsule floats free. "Lifting," Hamid says. "Do not move." As if we would. The wall across the shelf writes again. A line draws our capsule and our outlines. Then a line draws our bore. The bright moves to the bore and holds there. The radio gives one more borrowed word with a tone that turns it into a bid. "Stay." The heater fans whisper louder. Juno turns her head just enough to meet my eyes. This is the moment when a person with a certain kind of devotion stops being a scientist and becomes a subject. I give a small shake of my head. Juno gives one back, and it matches mine. She picks up the spare recorder from the rack and slides it into the outer access slot. She opens the slot door and sets the recorder on the shelf with the mic pointed at the wall. She closes the door and locks the latch. "Listen," she says, not to me, but to the room. The wall dims. The cable tightens. We rise through the tunnel and watch our own heat glaze it into a skin that seals behind us. The lamps pull the walls in to an arm's length and no more. The depth numbers crawl back. 10,000 feet, 9, 8. Somewhere around half a mile the cable skips and sings, and the capsule thumps. Hamid's voice stiffens and then smooths. "Counterweight engaged. New tension curve. Hold position." The capsule pauses in the dark and makes the kind of silence that has a shape. I count to 20, then count again. The motor pays line. The pressure gauge drifts up by small steps. I keep my hands flat on my thighs and do not reach for a single control. The heater pulls current and never wavers. I mark time out loud so the recording has a pulse not set by the city. Juno writes numbers on the window with her finger, and the fog of her breath marks them on the plastic for a moment before they fade. We breach into the blue mouth of the surface. The winch cradle takes the weight and bumps us onto the rack with a shove that is bigger than Hamid intended. The door opens, and the camp cold rushes in with its dry sting. The sterilization team meets us halfway into the tent. They do not cheer, they do not ask questions. They wipe the seals and strip the suits and make sure nothing we carry drips, flakes, or drops onto the floor. I hand over the sampler in its sleeve. The tech pushes it into a bag, seals the bag inside another, marks the tags, and hands the bag to Juno without any ceremony. It all feels small and careful and the right size for this. The station chief stands in the doorway and measures our faces the way a pilot reads a crosswind. He nods once and leaves us to the rinse. In the briefing hut, the heaters buzz and the coffee tastes like metal, and the first thing we discuss is the cable. The spindrift ran around the bore the wrong way during our lift. The loose snow spun from the hole in a thin spiral. Hamid caught it with a camera because he catches everything. It means the city sent a small wave back up the line, and we rose in a current we did not make. He wants to keep the next lift at a lower speed to prevent heat fractures on the capsule skin. Juno agrees, then opens the sampler and runs a first pass on the material stuck to the probe tip. The scan finds no cells. It finds no protein. It finds a lattice of an element we know very well arranged in a pattern no crystal should hold under this pressure. She does not name it. She just shows the graph and writes one word in her notes: active. We transfer the recorder audio to a clean drive and watch the spectrum scroll by. The chamber's reply to our taps forms a clean ladder with no noise between the bars. The voice that used Juno's word sits as a thin spike in the mid-range. It is us, but not from our lips. The rest of the file fills with low activity that surges and rests, in a cycle about 35 seconds long. It matches the boar glow we saw on the wall at the end. The city holds its focus on the hole we dug through its roof. The camp power system hums through the floor in the same cycle. The lights in the corners blink on and off in that rhythm for a minute before the regulator catches up and holds them steady. Hamid turns his head like a mechanic listening to an engine. He smiles without humor. It is in phase with us now. The station chief orders a pause before a second descent. He calls headquarters on the satellite link and makes a report I will never see. He does not need to tell us to keep our mouths shut. We understand that our words will run ahead of our work if we let them. We sleep in the afternoon shadows of the cargo crates, and the wind lifts the tent walls in long breaths and sets them down. I do not dream. I lie still and watch the zipper tape at the tent door jump when a gust comes, then settle back. The minutes move slow and honest. I get up when the low light on my watch reads 6, because my head wants something to measure. I brew tea in a cup we wash too much. The water tastes like nothing. It suits the place. At midnight, the borehole starts to sing. A tone builds from below the threshold of the heater fans and climbs into a pitch I can hear. The cup on my cot rattles its rim against the plate at a steady rate. I walk into the main hut with my coat held shut at my neck and see Hamid already there with his hand on the switch box. He does not throw the switch. He listens. The tone stops. The cup is still. Juno turns a page with a finger behind a glove and points at the recording from the recorder we left on the shelf. The spectrogram shows bursts that begin to match ours. The city is using the recorder's clock. It is keeping time with our machine, Juno says. It is not speech, it is mapping. It is learning stress and counter-stress. She draws an arc that starts at the bore and ends at the dome. It is protecting its roof. Our hole made a new failure point. It is bracing it with what it has. The station chief comes in and hears enough to know that a second descent will not wait for a committee. He lifts a glove and points at the rig. You go now. You take a metronome. You take 2. He knows how to talk to a system that listens to timing. Juno and I suit up again. The new checklist includes a simple pendulum with a light gate to count passes, a set of rate-coded lights, and a small hammer with a rubber head. I do not laugh. The tools are clean and idiot-proof. Good tools for a first conversation. We lower into the heat of our own path, and the light burns off the frost on the walls as we pass. The shelf meets the capsule with less drift this time. The ring around the base does not form. The recorder sits where we left it, a small black brick on a floor that might recast the ways of an entire planet. The wall writes before we touch it. The trace shows us the capsule, the shelf, the tunnel, the well chamber. It adds a thin line between the bore and the well. It drew a brace. Juno raises the pendulum and sets it in its frame. She starts it with a gentle push. The light gate ticks each pass and the count logs to my recorder. The wall lights on and off to the same beat. The rods in the first chamber flash at half that speed. Juno smiles inside her faceplate and sets the rate-coded lights to a prime number that no natural beat matches in this environment. The wall misses the first 2 cycles, then locks onto the third and keeps it. "Hello?" Juno says without saying hello. I set the hammer on the floor and give the pad near the well a soft tap in an even 4. The mesh hums in a set of 4 that matches the tap without delay. The ice around us stays calm. We walk the line between gift and trigger with care. We never ask for a door. We never ask for a bridge. We only speak in steady beats and low power. The city shows us a new map of the dome where some ribs have brightened. It is flaunting its work or asking for ours. Juno raises the microprobe, but stops short of the mesh. She writes a sequence out of range of a simple echo and plays it through the probe's piezo. The walls catch it, transform it, and give it back as a shape in light on the ice that matches our chamber and the slot to the bore. The shape includes a wedge we did not see. It sits along a load path. It is the kind of brace an engineer would build with composite ribs and bolts. The city offers a plan. Juno nods and draws the same brace with her stylus on the tablet. The wall adds another wedge at the opposite side. It wants symmetry. The ice above us sighs with relief so small the gauge calls it noise. I call it a win. We test the exit. The shelf holds without a new ring. The capsule lifts cleanly and the cable does not frost. The recorder on the shelf picks up a quiet run of tones that chain into a longer phrase than before, then fade. We haul up and out. The camp greets us with less fuss this time and more work. Hamid and I rig a set of passive anchors 20 feet from the hole, not in the ice but in the cargo platform, so the winch has extra stability if the bore pulse returns. Juno and the station chief mark a grid above the dome on a chart with only 2 layers, the cavern geometry and the scar of our bore. The city's braces match the geometry we can plot from the first scans. It did not fake a plan to trick us. It built ahead of the pressure wave and then showed us what it did. It is in maintenance mode. It is not a temple. It is not a trap. It is a city with no citizens and a roof to keep whole. We send a tiny processor down with the 3rd capsule run. It hangs on the shelf in a clear box on small feet, like a cautious animal that refuses to touch bare ground. It listens and counts. It does not speak on its own. The wall adds its clock to the board of light and puts it in line with ours. It enjoyed the recorder's steady beat and wants a metronome that does not sleep. I would call that human if I were in a rush to use that word. I do not use that word. I log the behavior and the timing and the temperature. I stand on a floor 2 miles down and try not to get used to anything. The room smells the same cold with hints of fresh melt and clean plastic from our suits. I roll my shoulders and keep my chin steady for the faceplate camera. 15 minutes pass without a pulse from the rods. The silence this time is intent, not empty. In the 4th descent, the city tries a word again. It takes from a new source this time, Hamid's voice from the radio test card. It says, in his careful tone, "Hold." We do. We do not step into the 2nd chamber. We do not tap a pad. The wall opens a window into the rib above the bore and shows a set of lines that darken and lighten at the endurance limit for this kind of ice. It is teaching. It is not teaching us to speak. It is teaching us to see load and brace without math. I step back to the capsule with that clear map in my head. Juno trains the camera on the pattern and records until the wall wipes it clean. The city wants the lesson to land, and then it removes the crutch. Juno curses under her breath at the lost data and then laughs because she caught it anyway. The rods blink once in what I would call satisfaction if I gave in to projection. I do not. I force my mind to the next line on the list. After the fourth run, the satellite link stops being a thin kindness and turns into a leash. Headquarters sends a voice that asks for a hold, and an inventory, and a legal framework. The voice does not ask if it is alive. The voice wants title and a guard line. The station chief gives back a patient answer that lets us keep one more descent without a change in rules. I walk to the rig in my socks and stand with Hamid while he tightens a bolt that already holds. He talks into the threads without looking up. I like machines that tell you what they want in units you already know, he says. This thing likes periods and phases. It does not care if we name it. I nod. Then we do not name it. We both look at the hole when a whisper I cannot call wind raises a small fog from its mouth and then lets it fall again. We go down with a new plan. We bring a thin cord with knots at measured intervals and a small bag of beads that clip to the cord. We aim to show it that our measure of distance matches our measure of time. Juno feeds the cord over her fingers with a careful care that would make a sailmaker proud. I tap the knots in a 5 count on the floor pad. The wall draws the cord in light as we lift and lay it. It adds its own knots at lengths that match ours within a ½ inch at 10 feet. I add the beads and count them off in time to the pendulum and the rate-coded light. The wall replies with a field of dots that arranges itself into a lattice over the well. The mesh rises through the dots and picks 5 to sit on. It has translated distance into load points. The ice above gives another tiny sigh. The roof holds. The room marks the success and then goes still. At some point, the work turns from discovery to shift work, and that is where the real danger starts. Awe keeps you cautious. Routine makes you fast. On the 6th run, I almost step on the foam outside the line. My boot sole grazes bare floor. The floor holds. It does more than hold. It molds upward so my foot will not tilt. It fits me. I lift my foot fast, and the floor drops back to flat with no scar. The rods around the room give a ripple that feels like a hand catching a mug before it rolls off a table. My jaw goes tight, and then I let it go. Juno turns and draws a small square in the air. Stop, log, own the mistake. I nod and talk into the microphone with a steady voice. Unplanned contact with live surface, no residue, no deformation visible. Subjective sense of assistance from floor. I finish the sentence and hear it back from the wall in my own tone. Each word split as if it wanted to pin the syntax down. I do not repeat the phrase. I do not want to hear my own voice from that wall again. The camp learns the rhythm of the city. The heaters step down in the minute before a bore pulse, so the regulator does not trip. The lights skip one duty cycle and come back. Hamid runs the winch motor through a fake load to match the pressure shifts so the cable will not sing. The station chief stops sleeping in his cot and moves to a chair by the window with a chart on his lap and a pencil he does not use. Headquarters keeps calling. The weather keeps its habit of swinging wide at noon and settling at night. A skua visits once and stands downwind of the mess tent with the patience of a monk. I stop noticing the smell of the sanitizing wipes. I still notice how the ice changes tone when I walk across it, a truth you feel through boot rubber when you have lived long enough on frozen ground. On the 8th run, the rods do not light. The wall does not write. The mesh holds flat over the well and ignores our rates and counts. Juno tries a new prime. Nothing. I try the 4-tap language. Nothing. We do nothing. We stand still for a full minute that extends to 2. Then the wall shows a different map. It does not draw the dome. It draws under the dome. It draws a knot of ribs near the far edge that we have not mapped. It keeps the knot dark and flashes the braces around it. It is telling us about a failure we did not detect. Juno checks the survey. The knot sits under a part of the dome we have not reinforced, and that the surface gear never saw as weak. The mesh rises a fraction and drops. The rods hum with low power. Juno touches my forearm and writes, "It is asking permission to move mass." I give the smallest nod I can. She taps the floor pad twice. The rods pour light into the knot in the map. The knot relaxes and the map returns to a calm field. The mesh lifts in a steady swell that tastes like clean air after a closed room. I realize I had been holding my breath for words I would not say. I let it out slow and steady, and the wall writes a dot pattern in answer that sits dead on that rate. It is not a mind in a way I can prove. It is a controller built for crisis that can include new variables and assign weight to a yes. We reach the part I do not want to narrate and cannot ignore. A fiber on Juno's left wrist seal frays under the clamp. A flaw from 1,000 miles away that shows up at the wrong second. The suit sniffs it and squeals. It is a tiny leak, but a leak in this place is not tiny. Juno checks her gauge and sets her jaw. She writes on my sleeve, "Return, no sample." I nod. We turn to the passage. The floor raises a rib in front of the capsule door that would keep a drift from pushing the capsule into the pool. It is the right brace at the wrong time. I wave my hand no and point to the door. The rib lowers. The door clears. We climb in. Juno presses her wrist to the patch kit, and the patch melts and seals. The sensor stops its cry. We do not trust it. We let the patch cure while the heater keeps the capsule steady. The wall writes a thin line from the well to the door, and then to the bore. It is saying the same thing we are thinking. Move, we move. Back at surface, we strip the suit from Juno's arm with the care of a person taking a bandage from skin that was grafted yesterday. The fray is real, the patch held. We lock both suits in a bin we will not open until a new crew flies fresh gear down the line. Juno washes her hands like a surgeon, and then sits and does not move for a full 60 seconds. The station chief sits across from her and does not speak. He does not put a hand on her shoulder. He has been in enough rooms with people who faced edges to know that silence is not a lack of care. She stands, pulls a fresh suit liner from storage, and starts to dress. She looks at me with a face that has no tremor in it. We go again, but we stay on the shelf. I do not argue. I have nothing useful to offer except a steady back and a good grip. Headquarters calls with a new voice and the brittle confidence of a person who has never had a boot sole slip on a rung. The voice asks us to declare the site. The voice asks us to cut power and wait for a proper team. The voice quotes a regulation about biological hazards. Juno taps the conference button and speaks in the tone she used on a camera crew that tried to open a clean room door with a shoulder. No biological hazard detected. No cut to power. Structural system under ice has synchronized to our power phase. A cut risks collapse. The voice argues. Juno plays the recording of the dome map with the knot and the correction. She says, "It is still alive. It is carrying its own weight. It is carrying ours now too." The voice goes quiet. The link drops. The station chief rubs his eyes with thumb and forefinger and says nothing. Night and day mean nothing here, and still we keep time on our watches. I walk the perimeter past the drums and the berm, and the lonely flag hung with rime. The borehole exhales a slow plume that hangs in the still air. I crouch and place my glove over the mouth. The vapor beads in tiny droplets on the fabric and then freeze. I hold for 5 beats and lift my hand. The ice falls in a small rain and tinks on the grating. The hole sings a low tone in reply, that I do not hear so much as register in the bones of my jaw. I stand and look up at a sky blank with cloud. The plane will not come soon. I am content with that truth. The work is here, the city is here, and the one thing I do not know is whether it was built by a mind with hands or by a long process that never had a face. The choice does not change my duty. I log the observation and the phase of the wind and go back inside. The last descent of this record begins with a plan to test active support. If the city wants to brace the dome, we want to see how it handles a controlled insult. We bring down a dummy load on a tripod and place it on the shelf by the wall, not near the pool, not near the ramp. The dummy load presses down with the same force as a snow truck stuck in a drift. The wall map draws the load as a bright spot and adds 2 braces under it that meet at a point that joins a rib. I step to the recorder in the clear box and press a key. It answers with a tone we reserved for a thank you we never promised to use. The wall runs the tone through its grid and sends it back. Juno raises her hand. She writes, "We stop now. We withdraw." I agree. We knock twice on the pad, a code we have used for end of session. The rods flicker in the same code. We leave the dummy load to watch what the city does when we are gone. We mean to honor caution as much as curiosity. The capsule climbs. The bore breathes. The camp meets us with calm motions. We do not declare a victory to the log. We record a session end and a transfer of duties to the devices we left behind. I clean the helmet glass myself, because a smear tomorrow would set my teeth on edge in a way I do not need at depth. Juno types a report to headquarters with the careful tone of a person filing a claim after a flood. She does not dramatize. She writes about cycles and loads and responses and a mesh that responds to a probe. She writes that we will not push deeper beyond the well until a formal protocol exists and a second team arrives. She writes that the site is under its own management and seems stable as long as the phase remains matched. She writes one line for the record that is the only line that matters to me. We have made contact with a city that still functions, and it has acted to prevent harm. The next morning, the recorder feed from the shelf shows the rods running a long, slow wave that passes from left to right, then from right to left. It repeats for an hour and then stops. The dummy load on the shelf sinks by a millimeter, and then rises by a millimeter and settles. The brace field under it thickens in the map. It had learned to carry a load like a new beam in a roof, not by our command, by its own aim. The station chief watches the graph with a face I see on men who fixed bridges after storms. He nods once. He does not smile. "It is doing the right thing," he says. He does not use the word alive. He does not need to. The word here is function. We pack nothing. We stay, and the work turns to care. Hamid checks the winch and the bearings on the idlers with a rag that catches any grit so fine you could not see it in clean air. Juno rebuilds the metronome with a heavier pendulum so the phase holds through a longer run. I write the operating manual no one will read until we are gone, the one with the lists for night shifts and bad days, the one that strips the poetry from the story and leaves the steps. The first rule reads like a joke and lands as law. Move with measured intent. The second rule says the same thing with numbers. The third rule tells the truth. Show it your load, and it will carry what it can, but do not ask it to decide for you. The last rule is the only one with a plea in it. Leave a recorder running. On the third day after first contact, the temperature in the dome rises by 1/10 of a degree without our heaters changing. The mesh wakes without a trigger and holds a set shape. The rods hum at a pitch that matches the wind over the rig, not the pendulum, not our lights. The city is listening up as well as in. It has found a new beat in the world above its roof and added it to the chart. I sit with the headset on and count the seconds between gusts by the flag's flick. The rods sit on the edge of that timing with a patience that makes my chest go tight for a reason I will not put into words. Juno leans against the hut window with her hands in her pockets and says, "It has neighbors now." She means us. She does not mean us in the way that makes people stage a ceremony. She means we are in its load path and it has accounted for us. That is the best kind of acceptance a system can offer. We have not solved origin. We have not solved purpose. We have confirmed response, protection, and a willingness to include an intruder in its model of the roof. We have watched it learn our pulse and teach us its brace. We have learned that fear does not help a person carry a tool through a room that answers gestures with geometry. Discipline helps. A schedule helps. Measured steps help. I am not brave. I am exact. I am tired in the way work makes a person tired, and still steady enough to go down again if the call comes in the night. The station chief will sign off on a formal pause at noon. Headquarters will send a plane when the weather allows. The city will continue under us, whether we leave or not. That is the truth that steadies the hands of a person who has to close a valve or open a door at the right second. It exists without us. It was alive before us. It is still alive now. This is my record of what we found and what we did not break. This is the way the ice answered and the way we learned to speak with our weight instead of our tongues. When a new crew steps through the tent flap, they will carry tools with polished edges and plans with good margins. They will ask for legends and maps and stories. I will hand them the manual and then point at the metronome, the pendulum, the cord with its knots, the small hammer that taught us more truth than anything with a battery. The last step in my manual reads simple. Go down together, come up together, leave the recorder running. The city 2 miles under our feet will keep its beat with or without us. We can match it for a while and learn to carry our own roofs better than we did before. That is enough for me to fold the suit with clean hands and lay it in its case and step out into the Antarctic light that does not care how many miles the ice holds below it.